Welcome back, America. This is a special segment of the Hugh Hewitt Show because Pete Kaufman agreed to help me out with this. If you have been watching if you're a sentient human being, you have seen repeated ads over the last year for anyone who ever lived anywhere near Camp LeJeune, the Marine Corps base in southeastern United States. And it's repetitive and it's overwhelming. Well, I finally got a request from my brother-in-law to find a lawyer who knew what this was all about because he had a friend from the basic school in 1968 who may qualify for relief. And I didn't know how to find someone. So I called up Judge Larson, my go-to guy in L.A. I said, who will help out a former Marine if they've got a legit claim on this Camp LeJeune thing? I never call a TV lawyer. He immediately said, call up Pete Kaufman. Pete is with the Panish firm in L.A., Panish, Shea, Boyle, and Rivapuldi. And you can find that over at www.psbr.law. All right, psbr.law. Pete Kaufman joins me this morning. Good morning, Pete. Thank you for getting up early to talk to me.
Yeah, sure thing. How are
now,
you,
Pete, would you explain what you did to me, the genesis of all of these ads? Because when they weren't there a year ago, now they're everywhere. What is this all about? What's going on?
Well, the reason people are seeing ads is that in August of 2022, the Camp LeJeune Justice Act was signed into law by President Biden, and the law gives people who were exposed to drinking water at Camp LeJeune between 1953 and 1987 the right to file a lawsuit against the government claiming that they were injured because of contaminated water. Before that act, that right largely didn't exist, and so that started the interest that you're seeing now, and then the lawyer ads sort of just follow suit.
Yeah, the August 2022 law, what does it allow people to claim, and what's the process that people have to go through? Because I have had a lot of people mention to me, what is this all about? And I really have no idea what happened at Camp LeJeune. The fetching Mrs. Hewitt never lived there. She lived on Quantico and Pendleton, but not there. So I don't really have a good idea what the claims are and what the bottom line is here.
Well, so first let's talk about the claims. From 53 to 87, it's possible that people who were stationed at Camp LeJeune or working there as civilian employees were exposed to contaminated water. For years, because of various base activities, industrial activities, storage of fuel, and dumping of toxins, notably by an off-base dry cleaner, contaminants like perchloroethylene and trichloroethylene, benzene, vinyl chloride leached into the groundwater, and the water system at Camp LeJeune is fed by a series of wells, and so the contaminants would be pumped up by the wells and put into the water system, and then you'd be exposed to it by consuming it or by bathing in it, because those compounds can volatilize when they're in hot water. So the contaminants are linked to various forms of cancer, and for years there had been complaints made by folks who'd been stationed at Camp LeJeune. And before the 2022 Act, they would make claims against the Department of Veterans Affairs or the VA administration. In 2012, an act was passed, the Camp LeJeune Act, which just provided for claims against the Veterans Administration. The 2022 Act is different. It requires people who want to make a claim to first make a claim against the government. So you make a claim against the Department of the Navy and say, I was at Camp LeJeune from this date to this date, and now I've been diagnosed with a condition, and I think that condition was caused by the contamination. If the Department of the Navy rejects the claim, and it's thought that the Department of the Navy will reject most, if not all of them, then you have the ability to sue the government in federal court, in one federal court in the Eastern District of North Carolina. That's what the 2022 Act provides for, and that process has now started, although it's started sort of in fits and starts.
Well, that's what I learned from you when I talked to you. And by the way, for the benefit of the audience, I don't know Pete. He's not a sponsor of the show. He specifically said he's not looking for clients when he did this. I just asked him to please explain why we have these ads. There is no unified litigation, right? This isn't like the opioids case brought by a state attorney general. It's not like big tobacco defending cases. It's not like fen-phen. This is different. Would you explain that to people, why this is so ubiquitous and why it's just unusual for a situation, for a mass tort situation?
Well, I guess the principal difference would be, unlike the opioid litigation or tobacco or fen-phen, in those cases, you can have cases in federal court, you can have cases in state court, you can have consolidation in federal court, and so actions from all over the federal judiciary can be sent to one judge for pretrial discovery, and then they can be sent back after that pretrial discovery is done, and so you get a huge system involved in handling the claims. And even under those circumstances, those cases can take years. In the Camp LeJeune cases, the Camp LeJeune Justice Act, the act from last year, provides for one federal court, so the Eastern District of North Carolina, and that federal court doesn't have the ability to send the cases anywhere else. So you have sort of two bottlenecks that the Act has created. One, everybody's got to first file a claim, so all of the claims have to go through the Department of the Navy tort claims process, which is not a very big office. And because the class period is so big, from 53 to 87, potential claimants number, and I've seen estimates of more than 1 million. So that's an extraordinarily high number of litigants who are then forced through this bottleneck at the Department of the Navy. When the Department of the Navy rejects those claims, and those people then have standing to sue, they go to another bottleneck, presumably, in the Eastern District of North Carolina and litigate their claims against the Department of Justice.
Have any of those cases gotten remotely close to being adjudicated yet, Pete Kaufman?
No. So, in fact, the earliest filed cases after the 2022 Act were dismissed, and the court's reasoning was, while these litigants had a claim that was rejected by the Department of the Navy, it was rejected before the Act was passed. So the judge read the Act literally. So not a claim rejected ever, but a claim rejected after August of 2022. So everybody started over. So now you're waiting for a rejection after the Act was passed, and you're waiting on an office that, by all accounts, is understaffed and overwhelmed.
So, Pete, when I sent my brother-in-law's inquiry to Judge Larson, he forwarded it to you. We had a long conversation about the merits of it. And how are you assessing claims that are rolling into you? And with 1 million litigants, there's going to be a best claim and a worst claim, right? There's going to be someone who really did get sick because of the water, and there's going to be someone who said, maybe there's a judgment fund out there and I can grab some quick thought. How are you assessing people who ask you to represent? And again, I have no connection to Pete, never met him, never dealt with the Panish firm. I'm retired from the law. I got no interest in this other than it's ubiquitous and strange, and everyone sees the ads. So how do you, as a lawyer who has to win, you don't want to lead people on, how do you assess the claims?
Well, so the way that I've handled it is to look back at the studies that have been done. So what science do we have available? The Camp LeJeune situation is a pretty sad story. We now know that the contaminants were there in the groundwater for a long time, and they were only found in 1982 because of routine water testing. And then there were several years of testing by scientists who worked for the government or who were hired by the government. And that science sort of developed into a picture that exposure to these contaminants, TCE, PCE, vinyl chlorides, and benzene, are associated with particular forms of cancer. So notably, the ones where we've got very good evidence are adult leukemia, aplastic anemia and other myelodysplastic syndromes, bladder, kidney, and liver cancer, multiple myeloma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and Parkinson's disease. So if you were at Camp LeJeune for 30 days or more, so that's the time period that's identified in the Act. If we're talking about real causation, the longer the exposure period, the greater the risk. And you've been diagnosed with one of those conditions, the science is at least strong that there's a connection. It doesn't mean that your condition was absolutely caused by that exposure. It means that there's evidence that of an association. Those are the cases that I'm looking at hardest. First, I want to prove someone was at Camp LeJeune, so that's easiest for an active duty Marine or his or her family members. It's a little harder for civilian employees, and it's hardest of all for people who say they were there for some other reason. But first, you've got to demonstrate exposure. That's what the Department of the Navy is going to look at. And then a diagnosis of one of those conditions. Now, when you see the ads, the list of injuries is much, much longer, and there may be some basis for that, but the longer that list gets, the lower level of confidence, at least as far as I'm concerned, to demonstrate an association.
Peter Kaufman with the Panish firm in L.A. I want to finish the conversation about why are you seeing a Camp LeJeune ad for potential litigants everywhere? They're ubiquitous. Why are you doing that? I turned to Pete Kaufman, the Panish firm in L.A. on the recommendation of my old law partner, Judge Larson and Robert C. O'Brien. Back to that. Now, Pete, I tell everyone, never hire a lawyer off of a TV ad. And I've said that for 40 years. I'm retired now, and so I don't have to do this anymore, but never hire, don't call the 800 number. That's going to take you to an intake filter. You've got to find someone who knows what they're doing. Will there emerge, this is really my last question, will there emerge lead counsel here so that this is not, I mean, this looks like it's an explosion of litigation. I'm not sure how this ever gets to an end.
Well, so as an attorney, that's what I'm waiting for. And we don't have a system in place to set up that leadership like you would have in a multi-district litigation. So that's a federal action where a panel in Washington, D.C. has ordered all of the cases to be before one judge. In that process, the judge is most concerned at the beginning in setting up that leadership. Well, the court in the Eastern District, and this is not a criticism, but they're dealing with a one-of-a-kind litigation where you're going to have a number of plaintiffs' counsel that is larger than the number of litigants in some cases. And it would make sense eventually for the judge to say, make applications to be part of the leadership, and I'm going to appoint somebody. That might happen. It just hasn't happened yet. So you have enormous interest. You've got you've got a huge group of advertising lawyers or money that wants to be in the case acquisition business, and the result is what you see.
And so, any idea how long we'll be seeing the ads for, Pete Kaufman? Because they are ubiquitous and they're driving me crazy.
Yeah, so I don't know. Here's what I can say. They'll probably go down, but they could certainly ramp back up as soon as they're in, as soon as there's any kind of a development. The earliest developments are a judge who's, it looks like, being careful and is interpreting the act conservatively. Eventually, I think there will be leadership. Eventually, we'll get a sense of what the Justice Department is going to do about these cases. But, I mean, it can come at us in waves. You can have a good deal of interest at the very beginning, which wanes as the litigation sort of drags, and then you'll get a rumor of, well, the Justice Department's going to pay all these claims, and then it'll be just as bad as before.
Right. Well, it is just everywhere. It's literally in the water, and it's figuratively in the water. And Pete Kaufman, I appreciate your talking to me this weekend to explain it to me, and then getting up early to explain it to the audience, because everybody knows what we're talking about. Because even people who don't watch TV have somehow heard about this, and that's the backstory. Pete Kaufman is with the Panish firm. If you want to read up on his bio, it's psbr.law, psbr.law. Thank you, Pete. I appreciate it very much.
Sure thing, Hugh.